So Dr. Stavros is directly involved not only in the therapeutic practice of individuals, but also in training therapists. He's a devoted Orthodox Christian. He and his family attend St. Gregory the Theologian in Massachusetts. One of Dr. Stavros' many gifts is being able to integrate so beautifully the life of our church and the field of psychologies that are compatible with our faith in a way that is accessible, in a way that is healing, in a way that is helping to promote our faith and good health. And we welcome Dr. Stavros.
Thank you, Father Alex, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you. It really is a privilege. It's a privilege to follow Deacon Stephen and his deeply moving and helpful presentation. So let me set the frame a little bit for what this is about. My time is not so much a presentation. It's going to be an invitation for all of us now to do some praxis of the things that we've taken in over the last couple days. So I'll offer some initial remarks, but then I'm going to invite each of us into a process of both self-reflection and some connection with each other that hopefully will put some of the ideas and experiences we've had so far into play. The model that I'm going to use for that is one that we use a lot at the Danielson Institute as part of our training. We have what's called a reflective practitioner model. And essentially what that means is everything that we do in relation to providing clinical service, we also try to take a step back from and consider why we do it and consider who we are as we do it. And in that way, it's turned into somewhat of almost like a combined contemplative practice and an active therapeutic practice. So I'm going to describe that a little bit, then we'll actually do some of that work together. Two things that I want to share that actually came from my time at seminary and had a lot to do with choosing a path towards clinical work and counseling. And they come directly from our tradition. The first is not long after I got to the seminary, I was introduced to Kallistos Ware's The Orthodox Way. And it's, a lot of you probably have read it, some of you probably many times. When I received my copy, it was this little black book with red letters on it. And I remember going through that book chapter by chapter and just, I had not actually done a lot of theological reading when I got to the seminary. It was more jumping in without knowing what I was getting into. And that book was such a powerful introduction to what was to follow. One thing that I remember from that book is the chapter on the Trinity and the way in which Metropolitan Kallistos described the three persons of God existing in a continual mutual relationship of love. The idea of God being one and three, and that the persons of the Trinity, the very essence of all that is, being relational and being guided by and held together through bonds of love. The implications for that I'm still sorting out and will continue to sort out, but it was a foundational piece of how I started to come to understand the world and life and a vocational call and to try to live that out. The second thing I came across was, it's a quote by St. John Chrysostom, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but again, it's something that has stayed with me over the years, and it's, when you find the door to your heart, you have found the doorway to the kingdom of God. Again, it was this one little idea, this one image that seemed like at the time, and in so many ways still feels this way, was an invitation into an inner journey, and that there was something inside every human heart that held that ultimacy of love and relationship, and that we had to go inside. We had to actually take a journey to find the door to our heart. Now, all these years later, I am still appreciating just what a difficult journey that is to find that door. It's like a jungle in there, I think one of the fathers of the church describes. And certainly, following on Deacon Stephen's presentation, trauma and sin and relational disruptions are part of what create that jungle and make it so difficult to find our way. But those two ideas, that love is at the heart of everything and that we have to find our way to that heart, kind of guide this idea of how we do the training and praxis of healing. All right, so at the Danielson Institute, we have a training program that includes all kinds of things. It includes individual clinical supervision of our training fellows' work. It includes peer supervision between senior clinicians of one another's work. It includes reading. It includes seminars. It includes time spent together talking about clinical work. And one of the specialized groups that we use that I'm going to invite us to try to do a small version of today is called a Cert group. And Cert is an acronym, S-E-R-T. And it stands for Spiritual, Existential, Religious, and Theological Concerns in Clinical Practice. Now, being part of a large research university in Boston, which is a relatively speaking, one of the least religious places in the world, even though our seminary is there. It's a way of trying to respectfully invite our training fellows and our staff into a process of reflecting on deep, ultimate concerns that have formed them and have called them into the field of being psychotherapists. Not everyone speaks the language of Eastern Orthodoxy, so we try to broaden the net. But the idea here is you can't be an effective psychotherapist unless you're reckoning with the deepest calls within your own heart, as well as being available to hear about and explore the deepest concerns and meanings of another person's experience. So in our Cert groups, we have a combination of senior clinical supervisors and training fellows, and we put them together in groups of 5 or 6, and then we enter into what's called a process of associative learning. Now, I totally understand when our training fellows and when my colleagues and clergy friends and people who consult with me say, I want to know the skills and the techniques to be a better counselor. I want to know what to say and what to do and how to say it, and I want to know step by step what it is that needs to happen. These Cert groups don't actually provide that. It's not that we don't provide any of that within the training program, but these groups are not about that. And what we're going to try to do today is not going to be about that. When we talk about associative learning, it's going to be about a process where we listen closely to another's experience and then respond by virtue of what we experience within ourselves. and respond with things like, that part of the story you just told really moved me in a particular way, and here's why. Can you say more about that? So it's not to tell someone what to do or not to do. It's simply to allow another person's story to have an effect on us, and then as authentically and vulnerably as possible, to say why. And what we believe can happen, and we've been doing these groups for a long time, we've actually started doing research on them, their impact on clinical practice, is that it can open up space not only for stories to be told, and not only for stories to be heard, but it opens up the discipline or the askesis of recognizing our own clay feet, as Deacon Stephen talked about, and to have that welcomed by our colleagues, and then to hear from our colleagues their own journeys. This will make more sense as I give you specific questions to be thinking about, but I just want to let you know that that's where this is coming from. This is a clinical training model. All right. So let's start moving in this direction. All right, 3 ingredients for pastoral clinical practice, for Cert groups essentially. The first one is self-reflection. So by self-reflection, it's an invitation to a contemplative spirit, to go inside, to look for that door to the heart. It requires a fair amount of silence and stillness. It suggests a kind of accountability for oneself if we're reflecting on ourselves and our own experiences. There's a way in which we can be accountable for them. If we know where our strengths and our vulnerabilities lie, as a pastoral caregiver or as a counselor, we're much less likely to act them out unconsciously or to inflict them on another person, because we're learning to hold them ourselves. In our Danielson model for self-reflection, we think of doing it for 3 particular reasons, especially around spiritual and religious content. The first is because we want to be accountable for what we believe. We want to have a sense of why we believe what we believe. We want to be in a position to not necessarily use the words of our faith with people for whom those words would not be a good fit, but to be tuned into the spirit of our faith in order to offer a healing context. The second reason is because we need to be grounded in our faith in order to provide care to people who are deeply suffering. We need it as a resource to strengthen us, to keep us in a place of humility and forgiveness. And thirdly, there are times, certainly more so from a pastoral perspective, but also clinically, when our specific faith journey has a place within the counseling session. I think Deacon Stephen's poetry is a good example of that, as he draws on a combination of clinical and theological ideas and actually offers it to his couples that he's working with. So in self-reflecting, we're being accountable, we are deepening our own resources to stay strong and humble within the work that we're doing, and we are holding resources that we can actually give to the people that we're working with. So, quick example of where self-reflection becomes important. A couple that I was working with, and these will be very short vignettes because I want us to get to the place where we're doing this with each other. We're going through a separation. It was a couple that I'd seen for a long time. Each of them, in the process of moving towards that separation, described intense early relational traumas that they had experienced in their families of origin. The husband had a very troubled and violent father. The wife actually had some difficulties in her family growing up with alcoholism and with an absent father. And in the process of separating, they hadn't talked that much with each other about the impact of these things on their lives as children and on their lives as a couple. It doesn't always happen this way, but for them, their separation actually then opened up more space for them to begin to bring this in. And as they were able to bring in more of their own vulnerability and more of their history of trauma, they developed a kind of compassion for each other that wasn't there before their separation, and they were eventually able to reconnect and reunite. For me, working with them, their separation became an intense event for me, and I had to think about why, and had to do my own self-reflection about what it meant for me to be the son of divorced parents, and the impact of that process of my own parents' separation and eventual divorce on me, and the expectations that put on what I wanted to have happen. Because what needed to happen for this couple was not what I wanted to have happen, or what I needed to have happen because of my own injuries. It was to be open to whatever was going to happen for them. Without the self-reflection, I think I would be more driven at any cost to try to keep them together, whereas self-reflection created more space to allow a bigger, deeper, more powerful process that wasn't in my control to unfold for them. All right, so number one, self-reflection. Second ingredient is clinical reflection. So, in our Cert model, it isn't always the case, but it's usually the case that we start with a piece of clinical experience. And one of our trainees or one of our staff will describe a case and that they're working in. But the goal of that is not to then provide that clinician with all the ideas about what they should do next. It's to begin with letting them tell the story and reflect on what that case means for them. We utilize different clinical theories, different psychological theories in order to do this. The reason that we try to ground some of this reflection in theoretical work is because, especially when it comes to things like trauma and the powerful relational processes of attachment, of family systems, of deep relational injury, theory gives us a place to think. It gives us a place to stand. It's not the truth, the map is not the territory, but it at least grounds us and settles us enough to be thinking about things. So, another example. I was with another couple, and this was a younger couple who had experienced pretty recently a very painful late-term miscarriage, and who also had experienced the death of the husband. And they were in my office fairly early in our work, and the best way I could describe them was they were both stiff and just holding on, like literally holding on to their chairs as we began to talk. And their facial expressions were fairly muted. Their words were pretty clipped, and there just wasn't a lot of vibrancy or life or emotion explicitly, just this stiffness. And at the time, two of my daughters were away at camp in Greece. And as can happen sometimes for me, my mind started to drift. I have this window outside my office, and I could tell I was starting to look out the window and have a mini daydream. And I started to think about my daughters in Greece, and there had been news about terrorism in some part of Greece, and I started to think about my daughters being in danger, and I started to get a little worked up in this session where I'm trying to pay attention to this couple. Clinical theory, one of the clinical theories that we use at the Danielson Institute, refers to a phenomenon called countertransference. And that's from the psychoanalytic tradition. Countertransference is defined in different ways within different theories. Some theories think of countertransference as the subjective experience of a therapist providing care where they need to notice that it's there and bracket it away because it's their stuff getting in the way of the work of the therapy. And that's one way of thinking about it. There's another additional way of thinking about countertransference, which comes from the more relational psychoanalytic writers. They think of the process as something being a two-person process, not something happening within just the therapist, where the therapist's or the clergy person's subjective experience is not only their own, but it's something that they're picking up on emotionally within the context of the therapy. So I had this in mind when I said to myself, what is this? Why am I drifting off thinking about my daughters being in danger in Greece? And as I slowed things down, I thought, oh my God, the couple that I'm sitting with have known nothing but danger and a dangerous world over the past 6 months of their life. And yet none of that is being talked about yet in the room. And so what I found myself doing through that self-reflection, the clinical reflection, was to say something to them like, I wonder what it's been like for the two of you to have navigated so much horror and danger over the past 6 months. And you could just see the way their hands let go of the chairs, and I remember both of them did this. Now that didn't fix it, but that opened up space for them to begin to tell the stories of trauma that they were facing and that were keeping them against each other and apart from each other. So, self-reflection has to do with those impacts on us that we notice about ourselves. Clinical reflection incorporates that, but it also turns to theories of healing and therapeutic process that help ground us and bring us back into creating space within the therapy. All right. Third ingredient. We're a community of healers. And we have a saying at the Danielson Institute that we teach on the first day when the new trainees come in, and it's never worry alone. If there's something that's concerning you, if there's something that you're carrying, if there's a question that you have about what needs to happen next, you're a doorway or a telephone call away from getting accompaniment with that. And the reason we say that right up front is it's a deep philosophical, and I think Metropolitan Ware would say theological approach to healing, and that is that it happens in the context of bonds of connection and love. If you will, one priest or one counselor is not a priest or a counselor. We have to be connected to others. So the third part of this model is to take these reflective processes and bring them into dialogue with trusted others. To begin to open up those spaces where we share our truth, even though it will be partially formulated and never perfectly concise, and give others the chance to hear and respond. That's what we'll try to do a little bit today. Just a quick little vignette there. Another couple with whom I actually worked for quite a while. A couple that in the suffering they were experiencing around the struggles of their son, who had struggled with methamphetamine addiction for years and years, and suicidality, and just being out of control and out of their control, would get into places where they completely took that out on each other, blaming each other, inflicting damage on each other, not physical, but emotional damage, pulling away from each other in such complete ways, from emotionally to sexually to intimate time. It was such a hard stretch of time with them as they tried to reckon with what their place was going to be in their son's life and whether he was going to survive, knowing they had so little control over that. So the intensity of that started to take its toll on me. I noticed I started to dread those sessions when I knew they were coming in, because I knew it was going to be another intense time together with them taking it out on each other. And so I had to turn regularly to the community of healers around me in order to talk through what it meant for me to experience that level of distress, hurt, anger, hatred, and to build me up time after time to be present to them in a way that helped them tell their stories. So, self-reflection, clinical reflection, community of healers.